Throughout the ages, there has been no shortage of sword-wielding badasses in the video game world. But today, we're going to look at the swords themselves. The instrument of choice of any true warrior, the sword is truly a noble weapon. These blades, some righteous, some sinister, have been pivotal in carrying heroes and villains alike across the path to their own destinies, honorable or otherwise. And today, we're gonna count down 8, yes, 8 of the greatest swords in video game history. Why 8? Well, because I decided not to have more than one sword per series on this list, and with that rule in place, there were really only 8 that I gave enough of a shit about to include. I mean, you guys don't want a bunch of garbage filler, do you? I didn't think so. Besides, now it's a top 8, like MySpace. Isn't that great? Number 8! Soul Calibur was one of the only fighting games I ever really got invested in, and the main reason for that was that the fighters all used weapons. As a matter of fact, the series itself is named after a sword, but the Soul Calibur is not the sword we're talking about today, oh no. Coming in at number 8 is the Soul Edge. What was once an ordinary longsword was bathed in blood and hatred, yes, hatred, so much that it transformed into a demonic blade and even gained its own evil soul known as Inferno. The Soul Calibur, the series' namesake, was then forged to counter the Soul Edge. The Soul Edge is best known for transforming my favorite character in the series, Siegfried, into my other favorite character, Nightmare, making both Siegfried and the Soul Edge look about 10 times cooler. Basically, when someone picks up the Soul Edge, they become cursed, and the soul inside the blade takes over their mind and makes them a violent psychopath. And the more blood the sword gets on it, the stronger it gets, and it's even supposed to be able to eat souls, so it's a pretty bad time all around. Or a good time, depending on how you look at it. Number 7! I have a problem when playing open-world type RPGs. Normally, I like to make pretty ethical and justified decisions when it comes to those around me. I save the village, I kill the bandits, I feed the peasants. But all that goes out the window when I see someone walking around with a cool-looking sword. I have to have it. And if they have to die, so be it. And when I laid eyes on Meredith's red lyrium sword in Dragon Age 2, my thought process was no different. Fortunately, she turns out to be a complete asshole, so I didn't feel too bad about wanting to kill her. Unfortunately, you don't get to fight her until the end of the game, and you never get her sword because it disintegrates when you defeat her. So there's that. Aside from looking badass and driving the wielder insane, the red lyrium sword, also known as Certainty, seems to have a range of supernatural powers, including superhuman strength and the ability to animate giant statues to kill your enemies. Apparently, Certainty was reforged and can be acquired in Dragon Age Inquisition. All the more reason for me to finally beat that game. Number 6! Have you or has anyone you know ever chopped a mountain in half? No? Well, this guy has. His name is Glenn, and he's a kick-ass knight who also happens to be a frog for reasons you'll learn if you play Chrono Trigger. And I highly recommend you play Chrono Trigger. Well, chopping a mountain in half is no easy task, and he couldn't have done it without help from his sword, the Masamune. In his fateful battle with the Fiend Lord Magus, Glenn and his mentor Cyrus attempted to use the sword to defeat the Fiend Lord, but the blade shattered and Cyrus was killed. In his quest to avenge Cyrus, Glenn sought out the remnants of the Masamune, a fabled blade capable of weakening the defenses of magic users such as the Fiend Lord himself. Ultimately, Glenn was able to reassemble the blade and use its awesome power to cleave the face of a mountain in half to reveal Magus's keep. Once inside, Magus created a near-impenetrable magic barrier to stop Glenn and Chrono, but the Masamune shattered it with ease, allowing the party to defeat Magus, who only survives because of the temporal disturbance that sent them all hurtling through time. Moral of the story, don't fuck with a pissed-off frog knight wielding a badass magic sword that can cut mountains in half. And also, play Chrono Trigger. Number 5! Coming in at number 5, we have a really obvious choice. Drumroll, please. It's the Master Sword. Ta-da! Not. The Master Sword is cool and all, but it always just ends up being the standard sword in most Zelda games, and there are always upgrades that are better. The Zelda sword that has the most special place in my heart is the Bigoron sword. Why? Because Ocarina of Time's combat was annoying, and the Bigoron sword made it all a big joke. And rightly so after the long-ass quest you have to go through to obtain the thing. The Bigoron sword deals twice the damage of the Master Sword, with the drawback being that you can't use your shield. The funny thing about it is you can just ignore enemies' mechanics and walk right up to them and start hacking away. You don't need your shield at all because there's no more sitting around waiting for the right moment to strike. Remember how fucking annoying it was to fight Stalfos? Not anymore, bitch! It even tears Ganon apart fairly quickly. The game tries to act like you need the Master Sword to beat him, but you really only need to deal the final blow with it. The Bigoron sword was honestly my favorite part of what I consider to be an otherwise overrated Zelda game. That's right, I said it.
Number 4.
When Zero first shows up in Mega Man X, there is absolutely no doubt in the player's mind that this guy is bad fucking ass. I mean, just look at him. The flashy red and white paint job, the cool helmet swooshy things, the hair. So then in Mega Man X2, they're like, hey, how do we make this guy cooler? I don't know, how about give him a sword? Boom! Zero just broke the coolness scale. The Z-saber may be one of the less flashy swords on this list, although it is basically a lightsaber, and if you don't think lightsabers are awesome, I don't know what you're doing here. Regardless, the Z-saber is incredible. The very first thing it does is straight up annihilate the copy of Zero that Sigma makes in X2. Not only can it fire beams as seen in Mega Man X2, it has the powers of all 4 elements: fire, ice, lightning, and purple. You can even get the Z-saber as X in Mega Man X3, and it's the most powerful upgrade in the game. That's because Zero is fucking awesome. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut myself off there, because if I don't, I'm just going to go on forever. Number 3! And here we have the second sword on this list, called the Masamune. Fun fact, Masamune was actually the name of Japan's greatest swordsmith, which is probably why so many swords get named after him. The more you know. Sephiroth's Masamune in Final Fantasy VII, also known as the Waifu Slayer 2000, struck fear into the minds of gamers everywhere as he slaughtered and impaled countless living things with it. The sword itself is of unknown origin. No one really knows where Sephiroth acquired it. It's said that nobody but him is able to effectively wield it, which would explain why he's okay with leaving it stuck in bodies, I guess to come back for it later. I don't know. Another explanation for this kind of behavior is that Sephiroth's life stream infusion enables him to manifest multiple copies of the sword that he can just leave in people. Either way, it's an awesome weapon. Clocking in at 8-ish feet long, it's no surprise only someone in Soldier First Class, infused with Mako energy and Genova cells, would be able to effectively wield it. You actually get a glimpse of the sword's stats during the flashback sequence when Sephiroth is in your party, and it's rocking 6 linked materia slots and a 100% critical chance, because fuck you, that's why.
Number 2!
It was a tough call choosing which sword from World of Warcraft would go on this list, but ultimately my inner paladin prevails. The number 2 spot on this list goes to the Ashbringer. The sword was forged for the sole purpose of annihilating the undead scourge and was named after and given to Alexandros Mograine, who was known as the Ashbringer during the wars against the scourge. And as far as nicknames go, Ashbringer is metal as fuck. Oh, hey Ashbringer, what you doing?
Oh, you know, just reducing my undead enemies to fucking cinders. How about you?
So badass. Anyway, Alexandros' oldest son, Renault, betrays and kills him with the sword, which was pretty shitty of him. This ended up transforming the sword into the corrupted Ashbringer, which was pretty badass in its own right. Alexandros gets resurrected as a Death Knight at that point, and once again wields the Ashbringer until his other son, Darien, kills him. Seriously, both this guy's sons killed him on 2 separate occasions. Then Darien kills himself with the sword in hopes of freeing his father's soul from the blade, and then he becomes a Death Knight. Then, Darien betrays the Lich King, which purifies the Ashbringer once and for all, and he gives it to High Lord Tyrion Fordring, probably in hopes that the Fordring family is much less fucked up than his own. In the final battle with the Lich King, Tyrion performs a mighty leap toward Arthas, Ashbringer in hand, striking the dreaded Runeblade Frostmourne, shattering it once and for all. It looks like this thing's going to finally be obtainable by the player in the next WoW expansion, Legion, which might be the sole reason I subscribe back to that game. We'll see. I mean, this is just a cool looking sword, people. I don't know what else I need to say. Okay, I'm sure I left some stuff off this list that people would have liked to have seen on here because opinions or whatever. So here's some honorable mentions. The Energy Sword from Halo, the Master Sword, the Buster Sword, the Lionheart, the Ultima Weapon, Rebellion, I don't know, fucking Hone Edge. Anyway.
Number 1!
The Soul Reaver, Kain's ancient blade, older than any of us and 1,000 times more deadly. The legends claimed that the blade was possessed and thrived by devouring the souls of its victims. For all our bravado, we knew what it meant when Kain drew the Soul Reaver in anger. It meant you were dead.
Originally just called the Reaver, this ancient sword from the Legacy of Kain series was forged by a blacksmith named Vorador for the vampires of old to use in their battle against their sworn enemy, the Hilden. The Reaver was an enchanted blade capable of draining the blood from its enemies, the perfect weapon for a vampire. It wasn't until the Reaver became haunted by a ravenous, soul-devouring spirit that the Soul Reaver was born. In this state, the sword was immensely powerful, capable of consuming both the blood and souls of its victims, becoming infused with various elemental powers and casting devastating spells on the wielder's victims. But the Reaver's true power lies in its ability to rewrite the course of history itself, but only when exposed to a version of itself from a different time. Sound confusing? Well, just take my word for it. The entire plot of the game and the fate of Nosgoth itself are shaped by elaborate plots put into place by forces of incredible cunning and power that manage to use the Soul Reaver as well as the main characters themselves as pawns for an elaborate scheme. But enough about that. Just look at this damn thing. This is the single coolest design for a sword I've ever seen. It captures a perfect balance between fantasy and realism, and the aesthetics are spot on to match the gothic, apocalyptic world of Nosgoth. Every single time you're able to wield the fully realized Soul Reaver in a Legacy of Kain game, which usually seems to happen right at the end, the feeling of unparalleled power consumes you as a player, and you proceed to obliterate everything standing in your way. And that's how it should feel when you're holding a sword. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The best kind of fight is a sword fight.